They don't leave bruises. They don't shout. They don't slam doors. But their silence cuts deeper than words ever could. You begin to wonder, am I too much? Am I asking for too much? Is something wrong with me or with them? This is the hidden wound of loving a dismissive avoidant. It's the slow erosion of self-worth, the way your light dims, not because they hurt you loudly, but because they love you quietly, conditionally, and always at arm's length. This video isn't about blaming. It's about unveiling what happens in the shadows of these relationships. The silent damage on the partner who stays, hoping, waiting, enduring, because love shouldn't feel like disappearing. And yet, that's exactly what happens. The subtle erosion of self-worth. At first, you don't notice it. When you meet someone with a dismissive, avoidant attachment style, they often appear confident, independent, even mysterious. They're calm, self-contained. They don't seem needy, desperate, or chaotic. In a world where so many people come with visible scars and storms, this feels refreshing. They make you feel like you can exhale. Because finally, here is someone who won't drown you in emotional waves. But then, something strange begins to happen. You reach out for connection, and they pull back. You share your excitement, and they seem detached. You express a need, and they go silent. It doesn't look like cruelty. It looks like composure. But inside you, the impact is devastating. Because every time they step away, a small part of you asks, was I wrong to ask? Did I do too much? Am I too much? The partner's internal war. The hidden damage begins with self-doubt. You start replaying your words, your tone, your timing. You begin to overanalyze every interaction. You adjust, adapt, and shrink yourself, all in the hope that next time, they won't withdraw. And here's the cruel paradox. The dismissive, avoidant partner rarely says, "You're the problem." They don't need to. Their silence, their distance, their emotional unavailability is enough to make you conclude that on your own. This is how self-worth erodes, not in one dramatic explosion, but in thousands of quiet, invisible cuts. The illusion of stability. To the outside world, your relationship may look stable. Dismissive avoidants are often skilled at maintaining appearances. They aren't volatile. They don't engage in obvious chaos. But what others can't see is that you are starving in plain sight. It's the kind of hunger no one notices, because you're still standing, still smiling, still functioning. But inside, you're withering. You stop expecting reciprocity. You lower your standards for emotional intimacy. You learn to celebrate crumbs, a short text, a rare compliment, a fleeting moment of closeness, as if they're proof of love. And here lies the danger. You begin to normalize neglect. You begin to believe that this is what adult love looks like. Measured, detached, careful. But really, it's not stability. It's survival. The partner's silent transformation. Slowly, without realizing it, you transform. You lose the sound of your own laughter. Because joy feels too loud for them. You silence your tears. Because pain feels inconvenient for them. You even swallow your anger. Because confrontation feels impossible with them. The dismissive avoidant partner doesn't ask you to change. But you do. You change because you crave closeness. And their distance forces you to bend yourself into someone who demands less. And each compromise, each silence, each moment you swallow your need, it chips away at who you are. Until one day, you don't recognize yourself anymore. Why this damage is so dangerous? Here's the hardest truth. The damage isn't just about them. It's about what you start believing about yourself. When love feels conditional, You begin to internalize the idea that you are only lovable if you don't need too much, that your needs are burdens, that your emotions are flaws, that your very humanity, messy, tender, raw, is something to hide. This belief doesn't vanish when the relationship ends. It lingers. It seeps into how you show up in future relationships, in friendships, even in how you relate to yourself. Because once you've been trained to minimize yourself, it takes time, sometimes years, to remember that you are not too much, that you deserve love in full, not in fragments. The invisible abuse. Some may hesitate to call this abuse because it lacks the markers we usually recognize: yelling, insults, manipulation. But emotional neglect is a form of abuse, and neglect, in many ways, is harder to recover from than overt harm. Because with neglect, there's no obvious wound to point to, no incident you can replay as evidence. Instead, there's emptiness, a silence that echoes in your chest, a question that never leaves your lips. Why wasn't I worth showing up for? And that question is the most corrosive damage of all. The beginning of awareness. The first step in healing is naming what's happening. This isn't about demonizing avoidance. Many are products of their own early wounds, their own unhealed traumas. But it is about recognizing that your pain is real, that your suffering isn't because you're needy, or dramatic, or flawed. It's because you're human, and humans need closeness, connection, and care. The damage of loving a dismissive avoidant isn't always visible, but it is real, and acknowledging it is the first act of reclaiming your worth. The silent loneliness of loving an avoidant. Loving a dismissive avoidant is not like being abandoned outright. It's worse, because they don't leave. They stay. Their body remains in the room, but their heart lives elsewhere. You share the same bed, but it feels like you are lying beside a stranger. You share the same home, but it feels like you are walking on different planets. You share the same life, but never the same intimacy. And so you enter a loneliness that is uniquely cruel. It's the loneliness of being unseen, in the very place where you are supposed to feel most known. The loneliness of reaching for a hand and finding it limp, unresponsive, not because they hate you, but because they cannot give what they refuse to touch within themselves. It's not the loneliness of being single. It's the loneliness of being with someone who is emotionally absent. And somehow, that emptiness cuts far deeper. You begin to wonder, is it better to be alone in truth than partnered in silence? This question haunts you in the middle of the night, when they roll over, away from you. You stare at the ceiling and ache, not for grand romance, but for the simplest things: a conversation, a look, a presence that feels real. But every time you try to bridge the distance, they retreat further into themselves. Every attempt at closeness feels like chasing a ghost. And so you stop asking, you stop trying, you stop hoping. This is how the silent loneliness spreads, not in one sudden moment, but gradually, like frost across a window pane. Cold, quiet, relentless. You start hiding your heart even from yourself, because it hurts too much to remember what you long for but cannot have. Friends might ask, "How are things between you two?" And you smile, you shrug, you say, "We're fine." But what you really mean is, "We're surviving." What you really mean is, "I'm alone, even when I'm not." Loneliness in these relationships doesn't come from lack of company. It comes from lack of connection. And that kind of loneliness seeps into your bones. It changes the way you carry yourself. It makes your laughter quieter, your dreams smaller, your hope thinner. You stop reaching for more, because more feels impossible. You learn to live on scraps, to starve in silence, To tell yourself that this is just how relationships are: distant, detached, safe. But deep down, you know, this isn't safety. This is abandonment in disguise. And here's the cruelest truth: this kind of loneliness makes you doubt your own reality, because they're still there. They still come home. They still eat dinner with you. They still sit beside you on the couch. So you ask yourself, am I imagining this emptiness? Am I ungrateful? Am I expecting too much? But no, you're not imagining it. You're feeling it. You're living it. And it's real. Loneliness in the presence of another person is one of the deepest forms of human suffering, because it tells you not only that you're alone, but that even when love is offered, it cannot hold you. And that's what life with a dismissive avoidant often becomes: a life of being close in body, but galaxies apart in soul. The emotional gaslighting of neglect. There's a kind of manipulation that doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't accuse. It dismisses. It doesn't fight you. It leaves you questioning yourself. This is the emotional gaslighting that comes with neglect. When you love a dismissive avoidant, your needs become invisible, not because you don't voice them, but because when you do, they are minimized. You say, "I feel lonely." They respond, "But I'm right here." You say, "I need more closeness." They respond, "You're too sensitive." You say, "I don't feel loved." They respond, "I show love by being stable." Isn't that enough? Each time, their words plant a seed of doubt in you, and that seed grows. Maybe I am too needy. Maybe my expectations are unrealistic. Maybe there's something wrong with me. This is how neglect gaslights, not through outright denial, but through quiet dismissal. It makes you second-guess your own heart. It makes you apologize for wanting basic human intimacy. It makes you shrink in the very space where you should expand. Neglect doesn't say, "You're crazy." It makes you feel crazy. Because how do you prove that absence hurts? How do you show someone that silence wounds? How do you explain that not being seen is just as painful as being insulted? And yet, you feel it every day, every night, every time you reach out and find nothing there. This is why emotional neglect is one of the most damaging forms of relational harm. It invalidates not only your needs, but your reality. You start living in a split world. On the outside, the relationship looks calm, predictable, even healthy. On the inside, you're unraveling. And the worst part? You can't point to one big event, one obvious betrayal, one undeniable wrong. There's no explosion to blame. There's only erosion. And so you start turning that blame inward. If nothing is wrong, then maybe the problem is me. This is the cruel brilliance of neglect. It hides the harm so well that you end up carrying the shame yourself. You lower your voice. You mute your needs. You numb your emotions. You do it quietly, so the relationship won't break. But in the process, you break yourself. And when you finally muster the courage to speak again, you're met with the same dismissal. You're overreacting. You're too emotional. You're imagining things. And slowly, you stop speaking altogether. This is how neglect silences. This is how it convinces you that asking for love is a flaw, that needing closeness is weakness, that your humanity is too heavy to hold. But here's the truth they'll never say out loud. Neglect is not love. Distance is not respect. Silence is not stability. Love is presence. Love is engagement. Love is showing up, even when it's hard. And if you have to beg for scraps of connection, you're not being loved. You're being managed. That realization is painful. It shakes the ground beneath you, because it forces you to see that the gaslighting wasn't just in their words. It was in the very structure of the relationship. A relationship where one person gives just enough to keep it intact, while the other person empties themselves to keep it alive. That's not love. That's survival. And survival is not what you were born for. You were born to thrive, to connect, to be seen, to be loved fully, not in fragments, not in shadows, not in silence. Naming this truth is terrifying, but it's also the first step to freedom. Because once you see the gaslighting for what it is, you begin to take back your power. You begin to realize that your needs were never the problem. Their inability to meet them was. And that shift changes everything. The damage doesn't vanish overnight, but slowly, the fog clears. Your voice returns. Your worth reemerges. Because you are not too much. You were just asking for enough. And enough is what you always deserved. The cost of carrying the relationship alone. At first, you tell yourself it's just a rough patch. That every couple goes through this. That if you just love harder, wait longer, be more patient, things will get better. And so you begin carrying the relationship. You plan the conversations. You hold the silence. You cushion the distance. You fill the emptiness with effort, with hope, with everything you have. You become both partners in one. You do the emotional labor for two. You bend yourself into a bridge, trying to close the gap they refuse to cross. And for a while, it feels almost noble, almost heroic, like you're proving your love by never giving up. But love that is one-sided doesn't feel noble for long. It feels heavy. It feels draining. It feels like drowning slowly, while the other person watches you sink. Because here's the truth. No matter how much effort you pour in, you cannot carry a relationship by yourself. But that doesn't stop you from trying. You remind them to talk. You remind them to feel. You remind them to care. You remind them to remember that you exist. Not just as someone who shares space, but as someone who shares a soul. And every reminder costs you a piece of yourself. You shrink your needs to make theirs comfortable. You silence your hurt so they don't feel pressured. You delay your joy so they won't feel overwhelmed. Piece by piece, you carve yourself away to keep the relationship standing. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you no longer recognize the person staring back. This is the cost of carrying it alone. It's not just exhaustion. It's self-erasure. It's living a life where your own heart becomes collateral damage. And still, the avoidant rarely notices. Because in their world, silence is peace. Distance is safety. Your sacrifices are invisible because they were never looking for them in the first place. So you begin to internalize the weight. You tell yourself it's your job to hold everything together. That love means endurance. That loyalty means carrying both of you on your back. But endurance is not love. Endurance is survival. And when you're the only one carrying, the relationship isn't mutual. It's lopsided. It's hollow. It's you bleeding quietly, while they mistake your silence for satisfaction. Over time, the weight takes a toll, not just on your mind, but on your body. Sleepless nights, anxious days, a nervous system locked in survival mode, always anticipating the next withdrawal. Your body remembers every absence, every dismissal, every time you begged without words for presence and were met with nothing. This stress compounds. It shows up as tension in your chest, as heaviness in your gut, as migraines that no medicine fully soothes. Because carrying another person's avoidance isn't just emotional labor, it's physical burden. And what do you get in return? A love that feels more like work than wonder. A bond that feels more like burden than blessing. A relationship where you're more caretaker than equal. The cost is not just burnout. The cost is your joy. The cost is your aliveness. The cost is every dream you set aside. because you were too busy holding someone else together. And the tragedy is, they may never see it. They may never know how much of yourself you've lost, how many nights you've cried in silence, how many times you've chosen them at the expense of you. But you see it, you feel it, you live it, and at some point, you must face the truth. If you keep carrying the relationship alone, you will collapse under its weight, because love is not meant to be carried. It's meant to be shared. A relationship is not meant to be one person climbing a mountain, while the other sits at the bottom, waiting for them to return. It's meant to be two people walking side by side, step by step, through the climb together. Anything less than that isn't love. It's imbalance. And imbalance always demands a sacrifice. The question is, will you keep sacrificing yourself, or will you finally lay the weight down? The path to reclaiming yourself. There comes a moment, a quiet, trembling moment, when the weight of silence, the burden of carrying, the ache of neglect, finally becomes too much. And in that moment, you realize something radical. You cannot save this relationship by losing yourself. You cannot fix what they refuse to face. You cannot keep shrinking and call it love. That realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, like dawn creeping through the cracks of a dark room. Soft, gentle, undeniable. You begin to see it in small ways. In the way your laughter feels foreign, because you haven't heard it in so long. In the way your chest feels lighter, when you spend time with people who actually see you. In the way your dreams still whisper, even under all the dust of neglect. And slowly, a truth rises inside you. You deserve more. Not more effort from yourself. Not more patience. Not more endurance. You deserve more love, more presence, more reciprocity. This is the path to reclaiming yourself. And it begins with permission. Permission to feel your pain. Permission to stop minimizing your needs. Permission to call neglect what it is. A wound, not a misunderstanding. It begins with reclaiming your voice. Speaking your truth, not to convince them, but to free yourself. Saying out loud what you buried in silence. Naming the reality you lived through, even if your voice shakes. Because every word you speak rebuilds the bridge back to yourself. It continues with boundaries, not the walls you built in desperation, but the kind that honor your worth. Boundaries that say, I will not carry this relationship alone. I will not accept love that erases me. I will not confuse neglect with stability. Boundaries that are less about punishment and more about protection. And from those boundaries, something beautiful begins to grow. Space, clarity, freedom. You start to remember who you were before you learn to silence yourself. You start to notice the fire that still flickers beneath all the ashes. You start to feel alive again. Reclaiming yourself doesn't always mean leaving, but it always means choosing you. Sometimes that choice sparks transformation. The avoidant sees their reflection in your boundary and begins to face their own wounds. Other times, that choice marks the end. The relationship cannot survive without your constant carrying, and so it falls apart. But even in that ending, there is freedom, because for the first time in so long, you are no longer carrying more than your share. You are walking light. You are walking whole. You are walking as yourself again. And in that wholeness, you discover something even deeper. Love is not supposed to feel like begging. Love is not supposed to feel like silence. Love is not supposed to cost you yourself. Real love sees you. Real love hears you. Real love meets you halfway. And if someone cannot meet you there, then walking away is not failure. It is reclamation. It is the most sacred yes you will ever give yourself. Because at the end of the day, you were never asking for too much. You were only asking for what love is meant to be. And now, you are free to find it. not in someone else first, but in you. Because the path to reclaiming yourself is the path to remembering you were always worthy. You were always enough. You were always lovable. Even in the silence, even in the neglect, even in the collapse, you were never too much. You were never not enough. And now, it's time to step into a life where love feels like love again. If you've ever felt this weight, if you've ever carried a love that erased you, if you've ever silenced yourself to be chosen, let this be your reminder. You are not alone. Your pain is valid. Your healing is possible. And your worth? It has never been in question. So if this spoke to your soul, if it felt like looking in a mirror, take a moment, breathe, and remember, the path to reclaiming yourself begins today.